brand new bike for just over £1,000, what's not to like? The Lexmoto ZSF 125 is a Chinese learner / commuter bike and it costs £1,999.99 new. It's absurdly cheap, but for that kind of coin, can a new bike actually be any good? That was the question I asked myself on my first outing on the ZSF. As I worked my way through West London, the 124cc 4-stroke air-cooled single-cylinder carb-fed engine quickly made itself known as a keen and friendly ally in the struggle past Chelsea tractors and executive coupes. It's only got 10 horsepower, but the motor provides enough power for respectable traffic light getaways and it will take the ZSF to 50 miles an hour and a bit beyond without any drama. It's obviously lacking torque, so being within easy reach of the power, which is mostly between kind of 6,000 and 9,000 RPM, means keeping the revs up. The engine is flexible though, and it would begrudgingly let me get away with being in too high a gear. In that scenario, the engine would just pick itself up with respectable speed as the exhaust note changed from a gargle back to its normal kind of buzzy soundtrack. It proved itself reliable in the morning, but properly waking it up requires some liberal throttle and full choke, and it fuels acceptably. It isn't rattly, overly noisy, and it didn't drop its oil in my garage. It's just a shame then that the gearbox feels vague, with the lever lacking a positive feeling. When stopped in neutral at a set of lights, after clicking down to first, I'd have to check the gear indicator on the dash. Yep, it's got a gear indicator, to make sure I'd actually selected first gear. Otherwise, I'd end up trying my best race start with the bike still in neutral. When it comes to stopping, the brakes are adequate, but they lack feeling. At the front, there's a single piston, single disc setup, and at the rear, a drum. The front has enough power, but feels vague because of the stiff lever. In the dry, the brakes were sufficient though, and I'll get to wet with the braking in a minute. So far so good then, but it can't all be smooth sailing, and the ZSF's low price is reflected in the kind of ride it offers. The non-adjustable front suspension wallows more than a mattress moving to the groove of love. The conventional front forks just work without much in the way of composure, and they need much better damping. The suspension felt frankly startled at having to deal with anything other than a perfect road surface. Using the front brake and even closing the throttle quickly would all encourage the front to just dive, and I don't weigh much. The ZSF's 18-inch wheels come on a set of Visordown tyres. I've never heard of them either, and I hope I never have to again because they are woeful. They're not particularly round, so during long or sweeping corners where the bike needs to lean into a turn, it just feels unstable. Grip in the dry is passable, but I reckon that if they had to deal with any more than the ZSF's modest claimed power or 125 kilogram weight, they'd crumble, perhaps even literally. In the wet, the ZSF's front end was unpredictable when slowing and coming to a stop. Grip from the front would be abominable, even if the tyres didn't have to deal with the mismanaged weight transfer from the divey forks. Once the wooden feeling front brake is added to the mix, it makes for an uneasy experience. It's something that could be easily changed though. Michelin and Pirelli both make suitable tyres that are almost certain to be better than the standard rubber. I'd hope that, combined with some decent tyres, putting some thicker oil in the forks would go some way to sorting out the front end. I mentioned that the ZSF has a gear indicator on the dash, which is basic, functional and clear. It even has a little startup procedure that sees the needle on the rev counter sweep round to the 12,000 RPM red line before settling back to zero. It's the same story with the bar switches. They all work nicely and feel like they're good quality. The shape and positioning of the bars provide the ZSF with good leverage and allow a huge steering lock angle. In built-up traffic, it excels at hustling past London's double-deckers and wayward black cabs, and it's ace at making tight turns, matching a scooter for filtering finesse because it's just so narrow. The ZSF's looks are unlikely to set your pulse racing unless you're a huge fan of the Yamaha YBR 125, which this bike takes inspiration from. Lexmoto have just added some pods to the side of the tank. They look like they might be directing air towards the engine, but they don't do anything apart from make the bike look less meek, so when you leave it parked up, the bigger bikes don't give it a hard time for being cheap and small. It's worth noting though that the paint is decent and just belies how expensive the ZSF is. So back to my original question, is it worth it? Well, if you're prepared to fork out for some fork oil and new rubber, then yes. Given the bike's price, there isn't much to fault in the overall quality, but the value that is present isn't necessarily where I want to find it. Give me decent rubber instead of a flashy dash any day.